Hello, my name is Daniel Zaslow, and this is my book review for my independent reading project. The book I chose to read is called Vampires in the Lemon Grove, written by Karen Russell. It's a collection of 8 short stories, none of which have similar plots, characters, or stories. They are all completely different and unique. The stories include, but are not limited to, a masseuse with magical powers that can cure PTSD, a vampire couple who are facing the struggles of a 300-year marriage, and a stable of horses who embody the souls of presidents once their terms end. As I'm sure you can tell, all these stories are very different, as stated earlier. They are completely unrelated, but this is where the author Karen Russell does a really good job of implementing common themes, traits, and ideas to really give these stories a sense of continuity and make the collection feel like a collection of stories. One of these traits that you'll notice from story to story is the usage of paranormal and supernatural characters. There's a lot of magic going on in these stories. As I stated earlier, there's the horses that embody the souls of U.S. presidents, and there's vampires, as well as scarecrows with human minds and a conscience, and humans turned to silkworms. One of my favorite usages of these supernatural characters comes in the opening story of the collection, which shares its title with the name of the collection, Vampires in the Lemon Grove. Quote, "I can't joke about my early years on the blood. I can't even think about them without the guilt and acidic embarrassment, unlike McGreb, who's never had a sip of the stuff." I like this quote because I really think it shows how unique a story can be when you focus on characters other than humans, which happens multiple times throughout this collection of stories. This is just one of those moments where 2 non-human characters interact in a way that you'd never see 2 humans interact, and I really think having those types of characters adds so much to a group of stories. Another one of those common themes that you'll find in the collection of stories is the theme of adversity and facing adversity. One of the stories where this theme is most present is titled The Seagull Army Descends on Strong Beach, 1979. It tells a typical David vs. Goliath story where the younger brother, Nal, is really just outshined and outweighed by his older brother Samson. It got to a point where he was really getting pushed around and felt the need to fight back. Quote, "Sorry," Nal said, shooting the basketball again. "I got no money." "You've got nothing?" asked Samson. He leaned in and made a playful grab for the ball. Nal slugged him in the stomach as Samson typically would. "Jesus, what's wrong with you?" asked Samson. Nal stared at his fist in amazement. He had no idea that swing was in the works. Not only is there character development with this quote, but there's also a common experience for the reader to connect with. Dominance by an older sibling is not unheard of, and if anything, it's probably more common than not. Through the thick of all the supernatural and magical characters, I think it's important that Russell included a moment where the reader could make a real-life connection to something as simple as a difficult relationship with a sibling, or even a friend or a teammate for someone who may not have a sibling. The third and final commonality I'm going to touch on is the use of various time periods throughout the collection. The stories took place anywhere between the 16th and 21st century, and depending on when it took place, it could really change the dynamic of the story as a whole. The story I mentioned earlier about horses' bodies being taken over by U.S. presidents, titled The Barn at the End of Our Term, used time period in a way that made this story really unique. Quote, "When Rutherford woke up inside the horse's body, he was tied up to a stout flagpost. He couldn't focus his eyes. He was wearing blinders, and a flag was whipping above him." This quote comes from the beginning of the story when former U.S. President Rutherford B. Hayes wakes up in the body of a horse. Based off of this, we can infer that the story is taking place in 1881 because that's when Hayes' last term in office ended. I find it really interesting and intriguing how Russell decided to set the time period this way. Overall, I think Vampires in the Lemon Grove by Karen Russell was a pretty good book. As a collection of multiple different stories, there were obviously some I did like and some I didn't like, but I do think that the good outweighs the bad. I'd say my 3 favorite stories from this collection are Vampires in the Lemon Grove, The Seagull Army Descends on Strong Beach 1979, and The Barn at the End of Our Term. Obviously, those were the 3 that I used for my quotes and examples, but I did that on purpose because I did really like those 3 stories. There's a ton of variety with the stories, and I think that's really good, especially if you're a reader who maybe wants to feel like they read an entire story in 20 to 30 minutes, rather than taking a week to read an entire book. It's definitely more of a bizarre collection of stories, but I do recommend it for anyone who just wants to read a book with no single genre. There's a ton of variety and a ton of different things to read throughout this book. Once again, my name is Daniel Zaslow, and thank you so much for listening to my book review of Vampires in the Lemon Grove by Karen Russell.